Because it's Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, we've been wanting to look at energy conservation, renewable supplies, etc., etc. But of course, water, in terms of sustainability, is very important for this area, Rich. We are naturally an arid area, and I wanted to find out exactly what the water situation was. So I've been talking to Dr. Rachael McDonnell, water governance and policy scientist at ICBA, the International Centre for Biosaline Agriculture, and senior visiting research associate at Oxford University. And I asked her first, really, in the water world, what does sustainability actually mean?
It's all to do with how much water we're using today relative to how much is available, and then thinking about whether we're taking too much for future generations.
Obviously, in drier parts of the world, you're going to need to use water whether or not there's enough left over for future generations. So what's the answer? We're obviously a bit short in an arid area like the Middle East.
So what happens here in the Gulf states is we manufacture a lot of our water. So although the main source of water is groundwater, because we've depleted those reserves and today they're in the UAE are used only for agriculture, we manufacturing our water either through desalination, which is what we drink in our taps, but also we treat that sewage water, and we have something called treated wastewater, which we use for a lot of our gardens, particularly the sort of civic gardens and that type of area.
We often talk about depleted aquifers. When you talk about groundwater, is groundwater much closer to the surface than the aquifers?
Here in the UAE, we have two major aquifer systems, one out around Al Ain, and then in the Liwa Oasis is another. These are lenses of fresh water. Throughout the rest of the UAE, we have groundwater there, but it's quite saline. And so what we have to do is we have to think about how we can preserve those freshwater lenses, because as humans we can't drink salty water. We can use it for a number of crops, but we have to begin to preserve those areas.
How bad is the situation here in terms of the towns? I remember stats a few years ago that if Abu Dhabi got no fresh supplies, that the water would run out in 2 or 3 days. Is that true? And what about Dubai?
In both those cases, because the water is manufactured through desalination, that water is then piped from the desalination plants either in Jebel Ali or those other ones, and that water is then stored in containers and then transmitted through to us in our homes, in our businesses. The problem is it's the storing, and so the amount of capacity we have is for about 2 days. And you often see those big tanks in places like Shuehan. So yes, we only have 2 days water supply from desalination, but what would happen is in an emergency, the idea is that we would immediately begin to ration it. If you think how we use that desalinated water, we water our gardens with it, we use it for washing cars, and in both cases, in the Dubai and Abu Dhabi, emergency measures would come in and we would be restricted to using that water. So yes, it's 2 days water supply, but in an emergency that would probably be more to do with 5 to 10 days that we have available to drink.
Sounds a bit scary to me, but does that worry water scientists such as yourself?
No, there are always contingency, and you can manage it. We obviously have lots of bottled water in the system. There are also various measures, such as in Abu Dhabi, they're taking, in the summer we have too much desalinated water, because desalinated water is a waste product. It's sort of a byproduct of generating our electricity. So in the summer, when we all have our AC units on, there is more water produced than is actually used. So they're taking that excess desalinated water, pumping it out to the aquifers and putting it back down in the aquifers. And the idea is that they will gradually top up those aquifers, and we'll have 90 days of water supply for us.
I mean, I remember a plan a couple of years ago to desalinate water on the coast, deliberately to pump out in pipelines to the Liwa Oasis, then inject it 100 metres or so below the ground. Is that the plan you're talking about? Is that what's actually happening?
Yeah, so it's called Aquifer Storage and Recovery, ASR, and there's a big area in Abu Dhabi that they're also been experimenting in places like Sharjah.
With the aquifers being replenished, to me, underneath, you pump water under the ground, it's going to get salty again, it's going to take a long time to fill the aquifers. How easily retrievable is that water?
There was a lot of studies trying to find the right place for this. Where will it be so then the water doesn't become contaminated by surrounding salty water? So they've chosen a place in which you can preserve that salty water.
And it's easy to get back up again to the surface?
Well, you would need generators. You need to be able to. It's a very expensive form of water, and that's why it would only be an emergency. So it's much more expensive than the desalinated water we get from our coastal systems. I mean, the way the coastal systems have been designed, we have water being generated both on the Gulf Coast as well as on the Omani coast. So if, for example, we had an oil spill in the Arabian Gulf, we could still generate water from the opposite side out at Fujairah and supply the system.
What about the wider Middle East? I mean, we think of it as a dry area, but some areas obviously have mountains, some have a lot of rainfall, some areas are particularly green, some have rivers. Are there sharing plans for the water in the Middle East?
It's a very contentious subject. What are called transboundary rivers, if you think about the Tigris, Euphrates, or the Jordan, or the Nile, you have many water-thirsty states wanting that control of the water. In all three of those cases, there hasn't been a successful treaty agreeing who has what from those systems, and it usually means that the upstreams build the dams and take the water away from the downstream areas. And we're seeing, major impacts on the water that comes into Iraq, for example, is salty. So this great vein of water that feeds the Iraqi people is now saline because of upstream dams and things like that. So this is really challenging water supply systems in these areas.
Globally, though, how are we set as a world in terms of supporting ourselves with water? Because it's vitally important, obviously, for all parts of life.
It's an ever-increasing challenge. We've heard this week about climate change. In many areas, we're getting less rainfall, higher temperatures, more water is being evaporated. And this is leading to lower stream flows, more use of groundwater. So, if you look at the maps of water, increasing water scarcity and water security, they call it, there are going to be some major problems. I mean, the World Economic Forum has again listed this week one of the biggest global risks is water security, water scarcity, because it affects us. It affects our ability to grow crops. It affects our ability to do business, manufacturing, as well as us in our own homes.
We're often being told as individuals to save water, turn the tap off while you're brushing your teeth, or have very short showers, don't fill the bath all the way up, that sort of thing. But on an individual level, does that help, or is it really just literally a drop in the ocean?
It's a drop in the ocean, but if you think about this, 8 million people live here, that's important. To me, I think the most important area we can save water is actually in our gardens. There was a very interesting study undertaken by the Regulation and Supervision Bureau in Abu Dhabi, and they found that what we use in our houses for our showers, our cooking, we're the same as most parts of the world. So you can compare us to Northwest Europe and to America, so where people are relatively frugal with their water use. But where we let ourselves down and where most of our water is used is actually in our gardens and in our washing cars and the things we use outside of the actual house. So if we were going to try and save water, it's in areas like that I think that we can make a big difference.
The government's here tried to remove subsidies on water for agriculture, alfalfa growing and other local crops. Has that been successful in sort of preventing water wastage out in the farm growing areas?
We can see that in Liwa, the Oasis, and in some of those other production areas, the Abu Dhabi Food Control Authority have brought in measures to change the subsidies. So farmers are being rewarded for good practice, and then they are losing their subsidies for growing very water-thirsty crops like rhodus grass, and there's been a big shift. So farmers are allowed to grow a certain amount, but after that they're paid not to grow it. So this is preserving the water in the groundwater systems, or that water can be used for more water-efficient crops, date palms, or crops that can grow in salty water.
Now, the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week is going to be talking a lot about energy conservation. Do you think that the main subject should be water conservation?
They go hand in hand. We use a lot of energy to desalinate our water. We need a lot of energy to pump the water from the grounds or to move it around the treated wastewater systems. But we also need water for energy production. I think you can't, and here we have the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority and the Abu Dhabi Water and Electricity Authority, so we know that they're very intertwined. And one of the things that we can do is if we can save energy and water, we're saving up the governments here huge amounts of money. It costs about $2 billion to build an electricity desal plant. So every time we're using excess money and the government's having to increase the capacity here, this is major investments. So what is a better way of using the money, a better business proposition, is for us maybe to save water and even out the use of water across the year and just, reduce some of the wastage that we have.
Dr. Rachael McDonnell, Water Governance and Policy Scientist at ICBA, the International Centre for Biosaline Agriculture, and Senior Visiting Research Associate at Oxford University. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to speak.